So welcome to our webinar today, Game-Based Learning, Leveling Up Student Math Engagement and Growth. Well, before we introduce you to our speakers, let me tell you a little bit about who they are. So today, Dr. Steve Ritter joins us as founder and chief scientist at Carnegie Learning. Dr. Ritter brings over 20 years of experience developing and analyzing educational technology. Author of numerous papers on the design, architecture, and evaluation of intelligent tutoring systems, he currently leads the research team at Carnegie Learning, focusing on improving the educational effectiveness of its products and services. Next is Manager of Professional Learning at Carnegie Learning is Kyla Gibbons, who's been working in the educational technology field for the entirety of her professional career and has a special interest in the content creation, authentic learning, and inclusive education. So with that, let me turn it over to Kyla.
Hi, everyone. It's super awesome to be joining you all today. I'm really excited to get us started and to learn all about game-based learning. Before we actually jump right into the discussion between Dr. Ritter and myself, I want to turn it over to you and ask for you folks to share in the chat a little bit about how you are incorporating game-based learning into your classroom. Maybe it's ways that you're not even really realizing already, and maybe you'll realize it throughout this presentation, but please feel free to share in the chat and I'll be watching here. I want to see how you guys are incorporating this. I see Julie says in small groups. Absolutely. Center-based learning. Love it. Great opportunities for game-based learning. Anyone else? How are you incorporating game-based learning in your classroom or even throughout your district? As a class for quiz review, game centers. I love centers. You can probably tell my bias already. Online games to spiral review. Awesome. Minecraft education today. Awesome. I love to hear it. There's lots of different ways to incorporate them. Early childhood programs, center hours, lots of games, card games with words. Oh, I love to see something that's not just technology. I love technology, but games don't have to just be that. Structured breaks, non-classroom based charter school, and you're incorporating it in in-person events. You're going to train parents and supportive adults. Math game night. Oh my goodness, this sounds so awesome. It's getting me so excited. And I'm going to just start continuing on. Please keep those in the chat because I love to see them coming. But I'm going to show you folks a little bit of what we're going to talk about today in the form of our agenda. We're going to define game-based learning. I can tell from the chat already, you already have some preconceived notions as to what it is, and I love to see it. We want to reinforce those and add to your learning. We want to see what it's going to look like in our classrooms. What is game-based learning and how are we integrating it in our classrooms? And what is the research actually telling us about game-based learning? Well, we're very lucky to have Dr. Ritter here with that, especially for the research piece. And then evaluating the impact, because we know it can be big, but we really want to figure out how we can dial down to that. And if we have time at the end, we're going to have a Q&A. So please post your questions and we'll get to them. And we're going to just lead a discussion here, folks. It's not super text heavy in regards to slides. It's just going to be me and Dr. Ritter chatting about game-based learning, something that we're both very passionate about. And so are you folks as well, as I can tell from the chat. All right. So before we jump right into the research, I want to turn it over to Dr. Ritter because I'm super excited to hear what he has to say on how game-based learning, or really play in general, supports our success factors in learning. Dr. Ritter, what do you have to say about that?
Sure, thanks, Kyla. I think games clearly get a lot of things right in terms of learning. And so it's important to focus on the features of games that really support student success. And I think in some ways the most important one is active learning. In a game, the player of the game is an active participant. They're doing the work. A lot of educational environments maybe that are more lecture-based in contrast, or even reading-based, is a kind of an information delivery model, which can be okay, but we know that active learning is the most efficient and effective way for people to learn. And so games kind of always engage people in that kind of active participation. Another important factor of games, particularly video games, but many other games too, is they give you immediate feedback. And there's very clear research on the importance of getting clear and immediate feedback. Immediate is often the best because it lets you understand exactly maybe where you went wrong or where you went right. So it's easier to connect that feedback with where you are in the process. So if you think about a delayed feedback when you've done multiple actions, that feedback can be less effective. But in games, often like you'll see, you'll get a reward right away, or you'll confirm that you're doing something right away, and so that helps students build connections between what they've done and what they and their outcomes. And then finally, of course, games are highly engaging for students. And so the opportunity to kind of keep playing, and particularly another factor that we look at is student agency, giving students choices. And good games often give students those kinds of choices. So students are in control of their own destiny, both kind of within the gameplay and across rounds, and choosing to kind of level up, to play in different ways, to continue to play. Those kinds of things are highly engaging for students.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to continue with that especially that engaging piece, it's very comforting to students, the concept of games. They're immersed within them in their personal lives. So seeing them integrated within the curriculum delivery, I think establishes a bit of comfort for students. And as we know, with comfort comes confidence, especially with that immediate feedback. So if they're seeing that, yeah, hey, oh, I know how to do this. I'm getting this right. I'm getting points, or whatever the game mechanics are. They're really starting to see and thrive within the math classroom or the literacy lessons, and they're gaining that confidence through the comfort. So absolutely, there's a lot of success factors there.
Yeah, one of the interesting design factors in games is how success and failure is presented to students. So in good games, you typically don't kind of succeed all the time. You'll succeed enough to get motivation. But what research has found about success and failure is the most important thing when you fail is to give students the sense that they could have succeeded, right? So the failure doesn't become something, and in contrast to a lot of classroom activities where students may struggle and feel like, well, this isn't for me, I'm not good at this, those kinds of emotions that might come up. And really good games are designed to continually, get players to keep playing. And one of the techniques for doing that is really, leveling, providing hints and adjusting, and providing feedback that basically says like, hey, even though you might not have succeeded this time, you can totally do it next time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that actually it's a great connection to the next question, being the important elements of game-based learning. For myself, when I think about games, and perhaps the ones I participated in as a child, there was a lot of this, competitive nature. Someone mentioned in the chat that children are competitive, and I think the competition is certainly an element to it, but it's not fixating on who's the winner, right? Especially when we're thinking about educational games and incorporating game-based learning opportunities, aside from just games. When we're thinking about learning, it's not about who's the best and who's getting all the answers right and who's, at the top of the leaderboard. I think there's a lot of elements there within game-based learning, and just, play-based learning as well. What do you think, Dr. Ritter?
Yeah, competition is a complicated subject because it can be highly motivating in competition, but like you said, it needs to be framed in the right way. If you're if you're somebody who's not going to win all the time, it can be actually really demotivating to kind of lose in that kind of competition all the time. So again, like one of the things you want students to be in is an environment where they feel they can succeed. Sometimes that the transformation from competition is instead of competing against another player, you're competing against yourself, like trying to beat your high score. That's often a very effective type of competition. But again, good games are very careful to situate the student in a place or the player in a place where they feel like they can beat their best score, or they could have succeeded and beat another player. The other part of this, and there's a lot of research outside of games, but in academic motivation about learning orientation, which is very relevant to the competition angle, which is when you go into a learning task, there are two types of orientations that you might take. The first is a performance orientation, meaning that you want to succeed right now at this task. So in a competitive game, you want to win, right? And the second type of orientation is what they call a learning orientation. So it's not so much about your performance now, but about the feeling that your participation will help you learn, right? And that's really the essence of a lot of that learning orientation, first of all, is very helpful to students in all sorts of environments, not just games, but it is the kind of thing that helps you believe that you could succeed in the future, even if you fail, right? Because your immediate success or failure is less important with that learning orientation than the feeling that, well, this experience was worthwhile, right? Because I've learned something and I can do better next time. It's not that performance orientation is bad, and these two don't necessarily trade off with each other. You can have both a performance orientation where you want to win and a learning orientation where you feel your participation is valuable because you learned something. But supporting that learning orientation is particularly important if students are put in this kind of competitive situation.
Absolutely. And when I think about just, incorporating elements of game-based learning in the classroom, I often think about if I was to just close my eyes and think about what this would look like in the classroom, a lot of times I'm seeing children and students in my classroom collaborating together. There's that social element as well within the games. Students are getting to learn together throughout the environment, and yes, it's immediate feedback especially within a digital environment, but we're allowing students to thrive in a very comfortable environment, but also one where they're fostering creativity and they're using their imagination and they're just exploring these concepts with I think a little bit of a lower stakes. Often when we think about, especially in the competitive nature and trying to perform, like we're trying to do our best, absolutely, we're all trying to do our best. But what we're really trying to do is explore the concepts in an environment that is familiar to us. It's one that we're feeling encouraged to play around a little bit and explore. So that's just, those elements of game-based learning, I think are so very valuable across all of our classrooms and across all different types of learners as well, right?
Yeah, and collaborative games, part of the fun of gaming can be part of being part of a team. So the interaction with your teammates when you're accomplishing a goal. If you think of like a game like an escape room type game, right? We're all in this together, and we each maybe have different roles to play or different strengths, right? And you really just get a feeling of how much you can accomplish as a member of a team that sometimes exceeds what you might have expected of yourself, and take some pressure off people, in addition to the feeling of being able to interact with others.
Absolutely. I love it. I love games, and I love game-based learning. But I'm really interested because a lot of my experience comes more so from the practical side of it and a little less from the research. But Dr. Ritter, I know research is your jam, right? So what does the research tell us about game-based learning?
Well, there's a lot of different things that I think the research touches on in how games can improve learning. The first maybe is practice. There's a lot of so there's a huge amount of research on the importance of practice. One of the things that I think people often misunderstand about practice is they think when you talk about practice, they'll think of more like a flashcard, like a rote memorization type thing. But in fact, practicing problem solving is equally as important, perhaps more important, because problem solving is so complex and involves so many different aspects. And playing games, or at least playing a lot of games, within a lot of games, they are problem solving. Problem solving is ultimately about giving choices and making appropriate choices when you have multiple choices to make. And so the engagement that games provide and encouragement for students to kind of level up provides a lot of opportunity for practice. Which leads to kind of the second element that's been really, it's almost more of a promise for games than a reality quite yet, but it's definitely getting there, is this concept of stealth assessment. One way you can think of every game as having integrated assessment. If you're succeeding or failing, if you're able to level up, those are all indicators of your ability. And the reason it's called stealth assessment is naturally in playing the game, you're demonstrating your abilities. It's not like no one would design a game, where you play through the game, you're really successful, and then in the end you take a quiz about how well you understand the game. I mean, what's the point of that, right? You've already succeeded in the game. And so the notion of taking this stealth assessment, taking the information that the student has demonstrated while they're playing the game and taking it seriously as an assessment of what they know and can do is a really important emerging field in the research area.
Yeah. It's so interesting because we can say games are fun, we can say that they're exciting, we can see that on the faces of our students when they're playing and whatnot. But when you bring up the concepts of assessment, that's really the root of what we're trying to do here. We're not just sprinkling in games as an extra. That's certainly a use case of games. When we're thinking about game-based learning, it's about that integration into our curriculum delivery and into our assessment tools. So absolutely. I love it.
Yeah, I think a lot of people think when they hear the word assessment, they think test, right? There must be an environment where you're kind of taking what looks like a test, right? And really what assessment is about is understanding the student's abilities. And games are perfect environment, particularly if the games are authentic with respect to the things that you want students to learn or be able to do. Demonstrating in a game-like environment is itself the test, right? It's not really different. It's in fact often more authentic than kind of doing a multiple choice test in a quiet room on paper or something like that.
Exactly, and that speaks to the active learning of games, right? And it also speaks to that increasing the confidence of students, and then we're really eradicating that test anxiety that a lot of students get and that impacts a lot of their assessment. If we're in a very low stakes type environment, whether it is or it isn't, we're just providing it to students in an environment that they're comfortable in, and that we're not just giving them a blank sheet of paper for them to work through. We're engaging with them, and they're engaging with the content actively.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'd love to hear some more feedback from yourselves. What is one key element, if you had to name one, that is the most important to yourselves? What is the most important element of game-based learning that you feel within your practice or within your own values that is the most important in your classroom? Let's see. Academic, relationships, engagement, dynamic, student engagement, fun, engagement. Seeing that little bit of a trend here. Enjoyable for students while learning math skills, relationships and engagement, connections to real world applications, Students need to buy into it, practice to strengthen problem solving, engagement, building self-esteem. I like that one. Fun, 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 fun. Engagement, educational, fun and learning, hands-on, collaboration, loving to be at school. That's an interesting one as well. And something that certainly games can provide to students because of the things that have been said by the other folks. Fun, engaging, motivating. Awesome. Absolutely. And that educational piece is there, right? We're not just playing games for the sake of playing games. We're trying to provide students with a number of opportunities to engage with what's being taught in the classroom or teaching through the games and the game-based learning elements. Yeah, absolutely. Fun to look forward to and growth. Really liking to see this. That growth mindset piece, I think, is a key element as well. All right, so let's hop back in. Let's kind of switch gears a little bit from talking about game-based learning and kind of what it is and what it can provide and stuff. And let's just switch just a little bit and talk about how can our educators that are here and educators everywhere, how can they use game-based learning to differentiate and accelerate growth within their classroom?
Yeah, great question. So games are, or many games are inherently differentiated in the sense that they have different levels. Which we often think of the levels as being kind of ordered, and they often are, right? You're going to harder and harder levels, but sometimes levels are just introducing different kinds of challenges. So it's not necessarily that one is harder than another, but it may focus on different strengths that different students have. Because they're so engaging, it helps you kind of understand what particular needs students might have. In terms of accelerating growth, again, it's a lot about engaging with the content. So one important aspect when you're looking at games is to think about and understand how the gameplay itself is advancing learning, as opposed to the learning being the game being a reward for learning. So we had, there's a phrase people may have heard about chocolate-covered broccoli, right? That some games, like the broccoli, is the kind of learning activity, and then you put some chocolate on it, you add some kind of gamification or gloss on top of it that makes it look like a game, but really when you bite into it, it's broccoli, right? And so I think really well-designed educational games make the education part of the activity, right? Which really also helps students to develop intrinsic motivation for learning. So the other thing you worry about when games are used as a reward, a lot of old style math games, for example, right? You go through kind of rote math activities, and as a reward, you get to kind of play a little mini game, right? And what happens is you sort of learn, or students learn, that the reward part is fun and the math is really painful and unpleasant, right? And that's not what you want students to get out of the game, right? You want students, hopefully, if succeeding in the game requires students to actually understand and engage with mathematics, that's a game that's going to reinforce the idea that mathematics and learning in general can be self-rewarding. It's not something that you need to kind of drag through in order to do something else. In itself, it's rewarding, and that's what this intrinsic motivation is really about.
Yeah, I really like the comparison or the analogy, I suppose, of chocolate-covered broccoli. It's one of my most favorite things when talking about game-based learning.
Chocolate-covered broccoli is your favorite thing?
It's my favorite thing to talk about. Not my favorite thing, but it just puts it just paints such a very clear picture about the experiences of students, right? When they're interacting with these types of tools or games, and these, like as you mentioned, those traditional math games and stuff, where it looks awesome. I can't wait. I have the title of game smacked on this thing. can't wait to interact with it. And then all of a sudden I bite in. This is not what I signed up for. This is not what I signed up for. And I think that, through game-based learning and thinking about differentiation and stuff, the concept of games being able to incorporate challenges for students that are tailored to the needs. They're providing that feedback. We mentioned feedback a little while ago. It's that immediate feedback to students. And they're able to, especially when we think about digital games, especially, not only, but especially when we think about digital games, they have the ability to adapt automatically to the students' needs and meet them where they're at, help guide them to where they want to go. And we can do that with games that are non-digital as well. It's just a matter of, it's almost like a choose your own adventure, right? So if a student is struggling in this area, automatically, let's just pivot the game. Let's just change it up. And you're doing so in perhaps ever so slightly ways. And you're doing it on the fly. And this doesn't necessarily mean that, I need to throw this all out and go a different direction. We're just adding supports. We're adding, whether that's manipulatives, if we're thinking about math class, or we're adding a variety of, independent supports or tools for students to use to help incorporate with the game. And we can really layer it up here. I really want to dive in now into what makes games different from other activities. What is the differentiator here, really, between games and just other activities in our classroom?
So I actually think that there's a continuum, right? That it's not like something's a game and something's not a game. So if you think about, like, there are a lot of trivia games, which are essentially, bar trivia kind of game is essentially a multiple choice test, right? But the environment around it makes it fun, right? Makes it engaging, right? And so there's this your typical multiple choice test. I think most people, when thinking about a multiple choice test in school, it's probably as far away from a fun and engaging activity as you can think of for students. But that just kind of points out that the environment around it can really transform kind of the content from one thing into another. Now, that's really a hard thing to do, to build the environment around it so that it is fun and engaging, but it just points out that there is this kind of continuum. And I think fundamentally, like, one of the things about games that is really important that we also forget about sometimes with school-based games is student agency and choice. I watch my kids play games, or everybody who plays games. Every game you try is not your favorite, right? If you try a game and you don't like it, you can try a different game, right? And that's an experience that often doesn't, like, if you tell somebody you're going to play World of Warcraft for 30 minutes every day, 3 to 3:30 or something, it becomes less fun, right? Just because, now it's an assignment. You don't have that choice. So both within the game and outside, within the context of choosing to play the game, to the extent that you can give students agency and choice over the environment, is really something that gives them kind of ownership and contributes to the enjoyment that you get from games.
Absolutely. And I think about, like, where games belong in our classroom, and how do we establish what a game is, or when do I incorporate games? That's a very valid question. And I think that there were some folks there in the beginning that really hit the nail on the head with centers and small groups. We can certainly do it in a whole group environment. We can certainly do them independently. There's lots of opportunities for that. But where I see game-based learning really thriving and bringing forth those elements of collaboration and exploration and all of that, I really see it in those small groups where we're allowing students to work together with a common goal in mind, and we're working through a curricular concept. I'm going to speak about math just because that's my comfort zone, right? If we're in a math class and we're providing students, let's just say with a deck of cards, that is something that you're not going to find on a worksheet, right? Or something very, very straightforward. When we're playing, the whole essence of let's say a deck of cards, let's incorporate the opportunity for students to compose numbers. I'm just pulling something up off the fly here. That can become a game. When we're thinking about balancing student motivation, when we're thinking about balancing student engagement, if students are, it's very clear, really, if you think about the games that you're placing in front of students. Is it a game or isn't it a game? If students are engaged, not all students, as you mentioned, Dr. Ritter, like not every student is going to be like, I love this game. But if students are engaging with math content, for example, and they're not necessarily really hung up on the math, and they're using math to progress through a game, I think that's kind of that real world example that comes in. Because if we're playing a game, let's say a digital game, we're going through, we're shooting some basketballs or something, and then all of a sudden a math fact pops up. Is that really a game, or is it now, as you said, is it just kind of a worksheet, or is it now just something like a multiple choice question like would be in a bar trivia? We have to think about what makes good games and what makes it really effective in our classrooms, and that's going to be different for everyone. But I think there's multiple elements here, and there's a careful line between knowing your students and knowing what motivates them, and oftentimes in their personal lives it's going to have something to do with games, and it's an access point that everyone can kind of join in on and have some type of success, where we're having that and receiving immediate feedback, and we're allowing it to be tailored to the needs of all students.
I think well-designed games often give students a safe place to explore and to fail, right? And so, the kind of support that you get from a game-like environment, again, with student agency and exploration, but also understanding that, unlike a test where a failure, it's high stakes and the test may have consequences and all that kind of stuff. In a game, again, in a well-designed game, which is supportive, right? Okay, you didn't, master the level this time, you just try again and then you'll do it. Right. And so building that kind of environment. And again, like some of that is built by the game and some of it is about the educational environment that goes on around the game, right? Providing students choice and making sure that students understand and have an appropriate orientation towards what the game really is and what the consequences are, and that they're expected to kind of explore, have fun, try things out. Right, that's the way you're going to learn from that game.
Absolutely. We think about, conceptual understanding and adaptive reasoning. I mean, these things come often one in the same with our games. If we're delivering them, or we're designing them, or we're using them effectively and creatively within our classrooms. And I think you said it right with that kind of low stakes environment for students to access them and to give it a try, without having that overwhelming pressure of I need to do X in order to get to Y. It just provides them with that environment with a little bit of flexibility and support.
We built some games a couple of years ago that really looked at this kind of idea of agency in the context of, so another factor that games often have is time pressure, which can be anxiety producing, right? But one of the really interesting things about time pressure is, and people think that time pressure builds fluency, which it does, but not necessarily in the way that people think. Often what time pressure does is it doesn't make you do the same thing faster. It makes you do something different. So like a good example in math is if I ask you to estimate some multiplication fact with decimals, let's say, if I ask you that on paper for homework, many students, maybe most students, will calculate in round, right? Which makes estimation seem like a really stupid thing to do because, it's not what you do. But the whole idea of estimation is to build this kind of number sense and mental math abilities. So we did this in the context of, one of the contexts we used was comparing fractions, right? And this actually came from watching my daughter do exactly this kind of thing for homework, where she was it was a bunch of problems that were like circle the bigger fraction, right? And it was like 1/3 and 1/17, right? And she's forming common denominators, right? 1/3 is 17/53, right? And I kind of stopped her and I said, well, come on, which one is bigger? And she says, well, of course a third is bigger, right? And I asked her how she knows, and she's like, well, I can picture like a third of a pie is bigger than a 17th of a pie, right? And I said, well, why don't you just circle a third and move on? And it turns out like Bob Siegler had done some work on exactly this kind of task. He called students good students who were able to kind of do the task correctly, not so good students who made a lot of errors, and then what he called perfectionists, which my daughter fits in that category of perfectionist, right? She felt that if she did it a different way from the kind of formal, correct, formal strategy, that was wrong. Where in fact, if you form common denominators in some ways, that's a rote procedure. Whereas being able to picture a different representation of a fraction, seeing a third, and being able to picture a third of a pie is actually a much more conceptual procedure, right? And it's one that's essential if you give students time pressure. So we created kind of a race car game where you could, you would need to kind of change lanes to determine whether the fraction on your car was bigger or smaller than a fraction that was kind of on the lane divider, right? And the nice thing about the time pressure there also was students could control the speed of their car. So they're trying to kind of run through a bunch of gates that present different comparison fractions, right? And they're able to control the speed of their car, which reduces that anxiety, but also kind of encourages them to go fast enough that they're going to develop these actually conceptual strategies for answering those questions. And when we looked at student strategies, different students approach the game in very different ways. But when you look at the first time they play the game, there are some students who are really these perfectionists in the game context who slow down. They want to kind of understand the rules, run through the track one time just to kind of see how it feels, right? And then they'll gradually get faster. And then there were other kids who were just like, I want to see that car go fast. And I may make a lot of errors, but I want to experience the thrill of like driving through this track as fast as I can, even though the errors give me penalty points and I'll never win. So again, like bringing it all together and emphasizing, like thinking about what kinds of thinking the game is making you do, how that plays out inherently within the gameplay, and also giving students choices about, playing the game in different ways.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful example of, time pressure for me is one of those things that's anxiety inducing. So I would be inclined to say, you know what, if I'm incorporating a game that has time, I don't know about that. I want my students to have time. I want them to be able to think. But I think that's a really beautiful example of course, where time is necessary, but also that agency piece where I can choose my comfort level. I can zoom right through this track, or I can kind of dial it back and take some time, but not all of the time, right? Not an unlimited amount of time. I love that. Mm-hmm. Dr. Ritter, how are we going to evaluate though how these games or game-based learning is having an impact on our students?
Yeah, one thing that's really important is the concept of transfer. Transfer is kind of the basis of cognitive psychology and education, which basically transfer is just when you gain knowledge in one context, are you able to use it in another context? So the brain is just a learning machine. When you play a game, you're going to get better at playing that game, right? That's how you level up. You almost can't avoid it, right? You will get better. There's this, long, well-established principle called the power law of practice, which talks about like how you get better with experience within an environment. But what's really important in education is we're trying to prepare students for the world, for some place, for the ability to perform somewhere outside of the game. So thinking about that transfer and understanding that transfer is really important. So said before that game-based environments are often more authentic. When you think of stealth assessment, they're more authentic environments than a lot of testing environments. But the flip side of that is you also need to promote transfer in a way that students, when they get out of that environment, will actually do better in another environment. So there were a number of, there was a game, I don't even know if it's still around, called Dragon Box, which was teaching kids in a game-based environment to solve equations. And they would use kind of dragon symbols and other little icons and things to kind of simulate solving equations. So you'd be doing the same actions, but you wouldn't be dealing with numbers and variables. You'd be dealing with these kind of shapes and things and get rewarded. And the amazing thing is students would get a lot better at it, right? And the game was cleverly designed, so when you got to higher levels, some of those symbols would morph into variables and numbers and things like that. So you got closer and closer to real equation solving. But what they found with that game was students didn't transfer. So that, even though at some abstract level, the underlying rule about, dividing a dragonfly by a dragonfly, works. In fact, the students' learning was so bound to the game that it didn't help them in an environment where we were using the kind of standard mathematical representations. So that's always a thing to think about, is that transfer and how students are going to take what they learned in the game and apply it in some environment outside of the game, because ultimately that's always the goal.
Absolutely. And to kind of clue up our discussion about this, I think, we've touched on a lot of pieces here in a not so game environment, but more of the lecture environment. It's kind of funny, but I do want to just have that conversation to really pull it all together about the benefits. Some of them I think have been interwoven throughout. Some of them may be intuitively clear, but I want to be very clear to summarize this for the folks on the call here, to talk about the potential benefits of incorporating game-based learning in the classroom.
Yeah, sure. I always think of it, there's two kinds of outcomes that we're looking for: cognitive and affective. On the cognitive side, we emphasize active learning and practice, immediate feedback, which helps students increase their learning. On the affective side, well-designed games give students self-confidence, right? They succeed. They see themselves succeeding, and even when they fail, they feel like they could succeed in the future. That's the most important thing, because that's the motivation to continue. The other factors that we talked about, again, in well-designed games, is that the motivation might start kind of extrinsic, right? You're playing, and that performance orientation, you're playing the game to win, to get points, to get coins, gold medals, all that kind of stuff, but transforming that into intrinsic motivation, where you feel like, you gain the self-confidence and the desire to succeed in the content, is really that's the best kind of experience that we can give students.
Yeah, you're giving them that opportunity to think critically. You're giving them the opportunity to engage, as you said, actively, right? And I think that's a key takeaway from all of this, is that active learning piece. Also with games, I often think about, in regards to the benefits in the classroom that itself, is that opportunity for, social emotional learning, that collaboration, that opportunities for students to build each other up through the games, to work together, to flex all of those skills. And they're really, games are an excellent place to foster that, because they're fun. It was said several times in the chat. That's a really key piece. And the fun, it's kind of cheesy. We say sometimes, I'll dive into a little mini presentation next on one of our offerings, but we often say, the math is the fun is the math. Students don't always realize that the fun that they're having and the laughter amongst classmates is coming from the math, or coming from the literacy, or coming from the science lesson that they're going through within the game. They're really engaging with something in an environment that provides them with all these opportunities.
Yeah, that's really the intrinsic motivation piece, right? If you see if you experience the learning as being fun, as being rewarding in itself, that's the magic, right? That's what gets people wanting to do more, wanting to learn more. That's where you really succeed.
I love it. Oh, I love games so much.
Math is the chocolate. I love that comment.
Yeah, math is the chocolate.
It's chocolate all the way through.
All the way through. I'm going to bite into just a big hunky piece of chocolate. I love it. All right, folks. I'm going to just jump over here now and talk about a little bit one of the offerings that we have here at Carnegie Learning, and present to you a little bit about MATHia Adventure. This is my jam. Research is Dr. Ritter's jam. This is my jam. This is what I absolutely love. I get to work with folks going through their own MATHia adventure all the time. And one of the elements that are incorporated here, there's many, and I'll touch on a couple. One of the elements within MATHia Adventure is the digital game-based experience for students of Zorbit's Math Adventure. So we have a little green character that's going through this kind of intergalactic world. It's very motivating for the students. It's I should probably preface this by saying MATHia Adventure is looking at the K-5 space. Zorbit's Math Adventure, the one I'm just going to talk very specifically about here, just as an example, is really in that K2, K3 space, where students are invested in the narrative. It's super fun. It's super pretty. But it's chocolate covered chocolate, because what students are doing is the math. And this is where I said that cheesy quote about the math is the fun is the math. And that's really the design of the game. It's a math first game design principle. If I just skip here to the next one, we'll see that the math is integrated directly into the environment. We just have an example here of using some 10 frames to compose numbers. What we're doing here, and the whole point of the game, is using these honeycombs to compose my numbers using the 10 frames. The point of the game is not to shoot basketballs or not to do something extra. It's really to invest in the math. Now, the whole narrative is provided, and we're in New Zealand, and we have the Queen Wendy who's helping us, and all this kind of fun stuff that's sprinkled in there for kids to engage them. But we're engaging them in the math themselves. They're exploring and they're going on these epic math adventures and exploring through engagement with the models and the manipulatives, things that we're using in our classrooms all the time, things that are there, base 10 blocks, place value representation, pattern and attribute blocks, you name it. It's ingrained in the platform itself. So that's when students are engaging with the game, they are really getting into that math and that, chocolate covered chocolate kind of vibe, is because when they do sink their teeth in, when the students are smiling, when they're having fun, we're really looking at increasing their numeracy development. We're increasing their math knowledge and their confidence in math, and balancing those intrinsic and extrinsic motivations. Yeah, there's some extrinsic, but really the shine of the show, the star of the show, is that intrinsic motivation that comes out of it. Also throughout the platform, so we do have this, digital experience for students, this digital game, but we also have within the MATHia Adventure platform, a whole robust library of offline games and activities and resources as well that are downloadable by educators. They can download them and implement them in their centers. These are games where they're using a deck of cards, where they're using some manipulatives. They are investing in the games. They are engaging with the games, but just not through technology. So we really try to round out game-based learning in a number of different areas. We also look at this screenshot here is a little different. We're looking at this experience that I'll talk about, which is MathStoria. MathStoria is our 4-5, 3-5, depending on where you're at, but that kind of upper elementary space for students. It's a game-based experience. It's all under the umbrella of MATHia Adventure. We have just 2 different games because our students, they're a little different if we think about that primary stage versus the elementary stage. Within this platform itself, we are kind of a little bit approaching games from a little bit more of a mature perspective, because the students are engaging with games outside of the classroom that are a little bit more mature. So we're incorporating themes of going through and rejuvenating an environment and thinking about environmental responsibility and community building, all using math, and we're powering that through play. We hold math to the highest degree of honor. And just underneath is play. And we really want to marry those 2 together in a very cohesive environment. These platforms are also adapted to students' needs, where they're at. We're meeting them where they're at. We're providing them with that immediate feedback. Immediately, we're providing them with that feedback and providing that to both the students and to the teachers. We're really communicating with both stakeholders here to create that environment. Dr. Ritter had talked about that stealth assessment. Both platforms here provide teachers with with that stealth assessment. They're providing them with that data from the gameplay. So when students are accessing Zorbit's Math Adventure or Mathstoria, teachers can access through the MATHia Adventure platform a whole robust table of data that's been aggregated, that's been sorted, that's been color-coded, and they can dive in to see how is student A doing with concepts X, Y, and Z. We can dive in, and not only are we looking at how are they doing with, this particular activity, we're looking at how are they doing with this particular concept. How does that even relate to my curriculum that's attached within the platform as well? And we're providing teachers that real-time insights into the classroom that cannot be compared to anything else within the teacher's observation. We're really trying to create opportunities for compiling quantitative data that's returned from the games and qualitative data with that observations, those rich opportunities for observations in our classrooms. All right, I'm gonna turn it back to Carolyn here. If you'd like, well, I'll say before I turn it over to Carolyn, if you folks would like to learn more about Zorbit's Mathstoria under the umbrella of MATHia Adventure, please reach out to us. We'll be more than happy to help with it. This little green character here on the screen is my friend Zorbit, and we'd love to show you a little bit more about it. You have a QR code there, and you also have a web link. Reach out to us. Let us know. Carolyn, I'll turn it back over to you.
Well, thank you, Kyla and Dr. Steve Ritter. Thank you so much for such an engaging session today. I can't thank you enough, but I learned so much. So it's been wonderful. And we've had such great conversations going on in the chat. If you need any questions or would like to know more about Carnegie Learning or about MATHia Adventure, please feel free to reach out. It's been wonderful talking to you today, and thank you for attending our webinar. Have a great afternoon and evening.
Thanks, everyone. It's been
Thanks.
lovely.